Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Au with ICF, and I'm an environmental specialist, joined today by my colleague Rob Green, Danielle Shoup from HUD's Office of Native American Programs, Chantal McKenzie from HUD's Office of Environment and Energy, and our special guest, Brian Sturdivant from HUD's Region 10 Regional Environmental Officer based out of Seattle. And today's webinar is Navigating Compliance with Endangered Species for HUD-assisted projects in Alaska. And let me share my screen. And let's see. Okay, everything's set up. This is a continuation of a webinar series sponsored by HUD's Office of Native American Programs on environmental reviews. The previous webinars are all posted on HUD's website. We have a link to this below, as well as at the end of the slides. A copy of the slide materials should have been included in your reminder email. There should be a link to them. And I'll have the host put a link in the chat box for that, for those of you who are joining with us live. This is the third webinar in a series, this year's series. Earlier this fall, we had a webinar on using tiered environmental reviews. Last month, we had one on HUD's noise abatement and control standard. And then today is specifically for Alaska grantees on the Endangered Species Act and streamlining the compliance. There will be more to come in 2024, so stay tuned in the spring, summer, and fall. Today's objectives are to discuss the use of programmatic agreements and guidance documents for streamlining environmental reviews. Briefly review what the standard compliance process is for Endangered Species Act in your environmental reviews, but then introduce and discuss a programmatic and a guidance document for projects specifically in Alaska. And that is going to be the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service programmatic document and the National Marine Fisheries Service, or NOAA Fisheries guidance. And then we'll discuss how to apply these processes to tribal projects in Alaska. I'm just going to stop my video to save on bandwidth in case anyone has connection issues. Okay, so first with streamlining environmental reviews, this webinar is really focused on one way of streamlining environmental reviews in the aspect of the consultation process for endangered species. So programmatic agreements and no-effect guidance documents, they're ways that can there are mechanisms or strategies you can use to streamline your consultation, where you might have a default process that says, okay, for these types of projects, you have to consult the managing agency for every project. But if you have these documents that are negotiated beforehand, then when you have certain types of projects that have been negotiated with those managing agencies, then you can bypass that consultation and save quite a bit of time in your environmental review. And so the managing agency of the resource you're consulting on predetermines what effects a certain type of project might have on that resource. And endangered species consultation is one topic that can be streamlined through this mechanism. Okay, so introduction to Endangered Species Act, just as a recap. Endangered Species Act protects species that are endangered or threatened, and these can be, fish, wildlife, animals on land, plants. This act is implemented by both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Department of the Interior and the National Marine Fisheries Service, also known as NOAA Fisheries, which is under the Department of Commerce, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And then there are other national acts or statutes that also protect species, including the Marine Mammals Protection Act and the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which talks about essential fish habitat, and those are managed by NOAA Fisheries. And then in your environmental review, sometimes you might hear about Section 7 consultation. And so Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, it requires that any federally assisted project consider its impact to endangered species and critical habitat. And so just to pull from the regulations or the act, Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act says that each federal agency shall ensure that any action authorized, funded, or carried out by the agency is not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of any endangered species or threatened species. And to do that, or result in the destruction or adverse modification of the habitat. And to do so, the agency shall use the best scientific and commercial data available. Further along in Section 7, the federal agency shall consult with the Secretary of the Interior on any prospective agency action if the applicant has reason to believe that an endangered species or threatened species may be present in an area affected by the project. Now, translating that to the HUD regulations under the HUD environmental reviews, the ones that are undertaken by responsible entities or tribes, under 24 CFR 58.5, you have your related federal laws and authorities, where the responsible entity, the RE, in your case, the tribe, must assume responsibilities for environmental review and certify that it has complied with requirements under these laws and authorities. And E is on 58.5E lists the Endangered Species Act as one of the acts that the tribe must demonstrate compliance with in your environmental review. And that's going to apply to your CEST review, so your categorically excluded subject to 58.5 reviews, as well as your environmental assessments. And you record that under the 58.5 checklist, also known previously as the statutory worksheet under endangered species. Okay, and then here's a brief overview of the Section 7 process, or how responsible entities or tribes normally comply with the Endangered Species Act. The first is, so here's a flow chart of the basic process. First is, do any endangered species or threatened species or critical habitat occur on or near your project location? And there's data that might be available at county level. You might be able to look, in an action area, so closer to where your project is. And then if so, does your project have any activities that have the potential to affect threatened or endangered species? And by that, we mean, could your project affect those species or their nests or habitats? So even if the species isn't physically there right now, is there habitat that they rely on that your project could affect? And also think about, is suitable habitat present on your site? So even if you don't have that species there right now, could they use that habitat on your site? And if your project is going to destroy that habitat, then you'd have to consult. And so if you do have the potential to affect species in any of these ways, then you move on to the next question, which is, what is the potential effect of your project? There are 3 official potential effects or findings that you could have for your projects. 1 is no effect. 2 is you could affect, but you're unlikely to adversely affect. So it's possible the species could someday be there, but you probably won't your project probably won't hurt it in any way. As opposed to adverse effect, where, yeah, your project could threaten or destroy the critical habitat that they rely on, or even kill a few individuals of that species. If you have a no effect finding, you document your reasoning for that and any supporting information, and then you're in compliance. If your may affect or potential adverse effect, either way, then you would consult with the managing agency, either U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the National Marine Fisheries Service, if you're talking about marine animals. And that consultation usually requires some type of biological assessment or biological evaluation performed by a qualified individual, someone who can survey the site and see what habitat is present, vegetation, soils. Are there signs of the species there, or is a suitable habitat for them? So there'll be an official survey or what they call a biological assessment or biological evaluation. And then when you consult with the managing agency, you can proceed with the project only after the agency approves the project or concurs with your findings. And oftentimes, especially if you have an adverse effect, then there will be some mitigation measures required to minimize any impacts. A note on defining what an action area is. It encompasses the full effects of your project. Definitely your property boundaries, but also further beyond that, the footprint, if you're doing any infrastructure, the full footprint of your construction, but not just that, if you could also have other effects such as noise, air pollution, water quality, stormwater discharge, and visual disturbance, where even if it's not really so that those are not limited to your construction footprints. They can go even beyond the project footprint area. So when you think about what your action area is, you want to round up or think more comprehensively about where those effects could show up. And then those effects could include affecting roosting sites, places where they nest, feed, spawning and rearing habitat, overwintering sites, and migratory corridors. So it doesn't have to be those animals or plants or whatever species they are, they don't have to be there all the time, but maybe they rely on that habitat for some portion of the year, or even just as a migratory stopping point. So in those cases, you still would want to consider your effects. And then just a quick rundown of different definitions of species. You have endangered species, which are species endangered of extinction, either throughout its range or a significant portion of its range. Threatened is any species that could become endangered in the foreseeable future. You also have proposed species, which they're not listed yet, but there has been a proposal to list them that has been published in the Federal Register. And then also candidate species, which is any species that we have enough information to support a proposal to list them as endangered or threatened, but they haven't been proposed or listed yet. And then any proposed or candidate species, they do not require Section 7 consideration. You don't need to consult about them until they're actually listed as threatened or endangered. But if you have a long project timeline, then you might still want to consider them, because by the time your project is halfway or just getting started, by then, that species could be listed. So that's something you want to think about if you see any proposed or candidate species listed for your area. And then critical habitat, another term that we hear a lot in endangered species, and that is a specific geographic area that has features that are essential to that species. And these are species that are designated in the Federal Register. And then I mentioned this in the flow chart, just to go a little bit more in detail, the types of potential effects. You have no effect, where you don't have any species in your greater area, such as in your entire county, there's no suitable habitat in your entire action area, or there are no pathways for the project to affect any species or critical habitat, may affect, but unlikely to adversely affect, where species are known to be present somewhere in the greater area. And because of that, the project does have some potential to affect the species or their habitat, but you're unlikely to really have any negative effects. And then finally, adverse effect is you do have species around, endangered species or threatened species, and the project must actively take some mitigation measures to avoid killing the species. So take is the kind of word for killing any individuals of the species. And then consultation, when that is required, you would submit that biological assessment or evaluation to the managing agency. Again, that's Fish and Wildlife Service or NOAA Fisheries. And then there's a distinction between informal and formal consultation. Usually, if you're a may affect finding, it's usually like an informal consultation. And if you have, but the distinction doesn't matter that much. What matters is you submit your consultation request to the agency and you wait for their response. Okay, let's do a quick audience poll. Your project involves relocation of housing from a coastal location. Which of the following could represent a potential effect of this project on an endangered species? A, chartering an additional barge for construction material outside of a regular public schedule. B, dumping or disposal of construction debris into near saltwater bodies. C, laying of new gravel fill. Or D, all of the above. And you should see a poll option pop up on, I think, the right hand of your side of your screen. Looks like we've got half of you, more than half of you with an answer. Give you guys another 10 seconds or so. Okay, I think we're ready to close the poll. And the majority of you said all of the above. One of you said chartering an additional barge, which is correct, but actually all three of these are correct. So the answer is all of the above. When you charter an additional barge for construction material outside of the regular public schedule, then that represents more boat traffic that wasn't previously scheduled, which could impact marine species. So you have beluga whales that might hang out near the ships and get harmed by the shipping equipment. For dumping and disposal of construction debris near saltwater bodies, trash gets into the ocean and then animals interact with it and you start getting like seals that get choked to death and really gruesome things like that. A laying of new gravel fill that could affect nesting habitat for certain endangered bird species. So these are not things I expect you to know right away, but we'll discuss these as potential effects in the programmatics as we discuss them, or in the documents. But yeah, very good, you guys. Most of you guys, know this stuff already. Okay, so back to streamlining tools. We mentioned earlier programmatic agreements and no effect guidance documents. These documents typically outline specific types of activities that wouldn't have an effect on that resource. And in this case, we're talking about endangered species. And it'll outline when consultation is or isn't necessary and what the next steps are. So it really gives you a roadmap to, okay, what's your project? and what are the next steps you need to take in terms of consultation. It takes the guesswork out. Earlier in one of the regulation slides, the Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, it said you have to use the best scientific and commercial data out there available. But, most of you, especially if you're a tribally designated housing entity, you're not going to have a biologist on staff to be able to know the specific ecological requirements of endangered species. So how do you know this information? And do you need to hire a consultant to do all this? So before you do all of that, or before you wring your hands, reading these or following these documents helps you take the guesswork out, and it just tells you, okay, these are the species, or these are the areas, or these are the types of activities that we want further information on. And so it helps really direct you to what you need to do for your project. They do that by leveraging the agency's expertise on endangered species. Again, you're probably not going to have a wildlife biologist on staff, and even your tribe might not have one. But the agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries, they have plenty of staff who know a ton about these species. So you use their knowledge to determine what effect your project could have. Okay, so first we'll get into the guidance on Section 7, consultation from NOAA Fisheries. And if I could just have, let's see, yeah, I'll have Rob put in a link to the guidance in the chat box, and this will also be in the materials. So with this guidance, it's divided into steps. So step 1 is, do you have any species or habitat present? And there's a link to the online system. This is specific to Alaska. So then okay, what are we dealing with? Is there something of concern in this area or not? And then after you check for species, then you go to step 2. And then before you go to step 2, let me just show you what the online tool looks like. It's called the Alaska Endangered Species and Critical Habitat Mapper web application, mouthful. So also called Alaska ESA Species and Critical Habitat Mapper. You click on the blue button, and then you get this interactive map where you're able to zoom in or type in a specific location within Alaska, and then it'll bring you to that area. And you can see that all along the coastline, in especially southern Alaska and in the islands, you have these blue bubbles surrounding the land. And so those are areas where you'll encounter specific endangered species or species of concern, such as marine mammals. So with NOAA Fisheries, they're not always dealing with Endangered Species Act. They're sometimes, just talking about marine species or essential fish habitat. So just realize there's that distinction. And then if you click on one of those blue bubbles, like the light blue, sky blue bubbles, then you'll get a pop-up that lists the species of concern. So here, ESA pop-ups, you have a bearded seal, ringed seal, stellar sea lion, fin whale, humpback whale. And if you notice at the top, it says 1 of 3, and there's an arrow on the right-hand side. So there are actually 3 pages of these. So probably more species are listed on the other 2 pages. And I'll show that at the end so you can see more clearly. So then once you determine whether there are any species in your area, then step 2 is when you determine what the effect could be. Examples of how you can get to a no effect finding, it could mean there are no listed species or critical habitat occurring anywhere or at any time in the action area, or no, listed species do occur there seasonally, but you're timing your action to avoid the presence of listed species, and there will be no effect to the species once they return because you're not going to affect their food source or reproductive habitat. Or maybe there are listed species in the action area, but no plausible routes of effect. So these are kind of their definitions of or examples of what no effect could mean. But to actually get to that finding, there are 7 questions that you have to ask yourself about your project. And you can't have to answer all of them. First is, and we looked at this in step 1, are there listed species or critical habitat in the action area? If the answer is yes or no, doesn't matter, you still have to go to the next one. Well, if the answer is yes, then there could be an effect. But if the answer is no, you move on to the second question. Will listed species be present in the action area while the project activity is taking place? Question 3, will the proposed action damage or destroy any critical habitat? And then this one we alluded to in the audience poll earlier. Will the proposed action require extra barge or vessel traffic to deliver supplies, materials, or equipment for the project beyond what is regularly scheduled? The shipping schedule is negotiated with input from the U.S. NOAA Fisheries or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So the current schedules are sort of designed to minimize impacts, but if you have extra shipping that's required, extra boats or ships, then that could represent an additional threat. And then question 5, will any part of the project take place below the mean higher high water line, so basically the high tide line? And this really only applies to projects that involve docks or seawalls or something where you're building in the water. Most of your housing projects are not going to involve that. So this one, hopefully for most of you, will be no most of the time. And this one you do have to pay attention to and figure out what is happening for your project is, do you expect contaminants, trash, or debris from the project action to reach salt water? If you're doing rehab or demolition or anything where, you're taking out old windows, old roofs, old housing materials, and you're dumping them somewhere, you have to trash them somewhere. But where is that somewhere? If you're dumping them somewhere where it could get flooded and go into the ocean, then that trash can then end up killing animals. If you have certain plastic things that wrap themselves around, seal necks. There are photos on on a website. One of the NOAA fisheries websites has gruesome photos of animals getting killed by trash and debris. So you could take a look at that if you need any convincing. And then the 7th question is, will the project action be within 3,000 feet of where seals or sea lions are, or will it be hauled out, including those on ice? Basically, if you're within 3,000 feet of where seals and sea lions are, construction noise or even just visual disturbance could scare these animals and cause them to abandon their babies or their pups. So that's, you just really want to keep your distance from these animals. If you answer no to all 7 questions that I just went over, then you can have a no effect finding. But if you answer yes to any of them, then your project may affect endangered species or critical habitat, and you'd have to move on to the next step, which is pursue consultation with NOAA Fisheries. Just a note, consultation must be initiated by the tribe and not the tribally designated housing entity, because the tribe is the responsible entity that has the authority to carry out the Part 58 environmental reviews for HUD or on behalf of HUD. And then step 3 is consultation. If you're doing informal consultation, that typically takes 30 to 60 days, depending on staffing and workload levels at NOAA Fisheries. The tribe or HUD provides a biological evaluation or assessment to NOAA fisheries, and then they'll review it and provide you with a response. If they agree with your finding, then they'll issue you a letter of concurrence. But if they don't agree, if they do not concur, then they would include recommendations for changes to your proposed action or a recommendation for formal consultation. And so just make sure that you understand what the response is. And if they ask for a response back, then make sure you do that and close out the consultation before moving forward. If you end up doing formal consultation, that typically can take about 135 days plus or minus, again, depending on staffing levels and workload at NOAA Fisheries. And they will review, again, your biological assessment. And this time they'll provide you with a biological opinion and incidental take statement. And their response will include required mitigation measures. And that's because when you're pursuing formal consultation, that's usually because you do have a potential adverse effect and your project could kill some individuals of an endangered species or species of concern. And so there's going to be more work to come to an agreement to minimize the amount of damage. And so they will require mitigation. Just a note, if you do end up needing to consult, right away you can consult, you can reach out to NOAA Fisheries and ask them, hey, this is my project, this is what we're doing, and these are the species that are in the area. What do I do? Can I get some technical assistance or help? And, maybe they can help you out with directing you to what to do, or maybe they can even come out and look at your project a little bit. So it's always a good idea to ask early, reach out early, and see what direction they can provide you with, so that you don't lose too much time, or if you don't know what you're doing at all, having someone direct you will help you with that. And so here's a contact at NOAA Fisheries for more information and who to contact if you're trying to do consultation. Okay, to see if everyone's following along with me, let's say your rehab project occurs in an area with no listed species or critical habitat. Can you assume a no effect finding based on this? A, yes, no species or critical habitat means no effect. B, no, you need to answer no to all 7 questions on the guidance, including the one about trash debris reaching salt water. Or C, no, you always have to consult in Alaska. So we'll give you guys a minute for that. So far, about half of you have answered. Give you a few more seconds to get more people. Okay, so polling has closed. Over half of you, or most of you, answered no. You need to answer no to all 7 questions, including the one about trash or debris reaching salt water, and that is the correct answer. In a lot of areas of the country, when you have no species or critical habitat in your area, that means no effect. But here we are concerned with what gets into water. And so the main one on those 7 questions is, even if you don't have any species in your area, what about the trash that you're going to be dumping somewhere? Where's that trash going? You put in a transfer station, or it's getting dumped at a local neighborhood dump, but where is that and how well controlled is it? Is it near the ocean? Is it near a source, a salt water body that could enter the ocean or enter an area where even though it's not near your project, maybe that trash ends up in an area that could affect species. So in Alaska, you do need to worry about all 7 questions, even if you don't have any species or habitat present. So very good. Now we'll move on to the HUD programmatic approach with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And there will be a link to this posted in the resources and possibly in the chat in a few seconds. So with the programmatic for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it has several questions that walks you through kind of a choose your own adventure. If A, then B, or if here, then go to this. So the first question that it asks is your project located in one of the following communities? And it's going to be in the back of the guidance or the back of the programmatic document in table 3. For now, you can ignore table 1 and 2. That's just for your information. But table 3, if your project is in table 3, then you automatically, because Fish and Wildlife Service has determined that these villages either don't have the species, or it's just too far away, or it's not near any critical habitat. If your community is not listed in table 3, that's okay, then you just go to question 2. But if you are one of the communities listed in table 3, then you just document that and you're done with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service part of Endangered Species Act, Section 7 compliance. Question 2, is your project located in one of these villages north of the 69th parallel? And I have an approximate map showing that location. If so, then actually you automatically do need to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And if not, then you move on to the next question. Question 3, will the project take place sometime October through April? And actually the wording in the guidance, or the wording in the programmatic, says, will the project take place outside of May through September, which is more the nesting season. So just kind of taking the double negative out and saying, well, okay, so if they're concerned with the time period May through September, that means that if your project will only take place October through April, then actually you will likely have fewer effects. If so if you're going to do some interior rehab in the winter, for example, then you automatically go to a may affect, unlikely to adversely affect finding. And once you reach that finding, you submit a reporting form to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which I'll go over later. And if your environmental review was a CADEX categorically excluded subject to 58.5 review, your CEST review cannot convert to exempt. But if you're doing construction in the spring and summer, which is usually when construction happens, especially, in the cold outdoor temperatures of Alaska, then you just move on to the next question. Question 4 asks, does the project occur within the existing village footprint? There's a village there already. You're just doing single family rehab, giving folks new roofs or something, interior rehab, exterior rehab, whatever it is, or even just building a new home in a lot in an existing village footprint. If so, again, you can reach that may affect, unlikely to adversely affect finding. Again, there's a reporting form that you submit to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and your CEST reviews cannot convert to exempt. If you're doing a project where you are building outside an existing village footprint, such as if you're relocating your entire village uphill or upland or inland, then you go straight to question 5. Question 5 is, will new groundbreaking activities take place? And specifically, we're concerned here with gravel fill or gravel pad fill, because that's, if you're installing that, then there's a potential to affect habitat for nesting birds. If you're not doing new ground disturbance, then your effect is may affect, unlikely to adversely affect. Again, there's a reporting form you submit, and your project cannot convert to exempt. But if you are doing ground disturbing activities, specifically gravel fill, then you have to request consultation, because this is something that, yeah, there is a likelihood of harming some endangered species or habitat. Unclear. It's just we need more information. We'll have to actually look at your project. And so that's when you'll want to contact Fish and Wildlife Service and, go through with the next steps, such as getting that biological assessment, biological evaluation, and consulting with them, and any required mitigation. Submitting a biological assessment. And again, the consultation must be initiated by the tribe and not the tribally designated housing entity. Okay, and so here is the reporting form, and it is available online. And I'll have Rob include a link of that in the chat box. This reporting form, the link is available within the guidance or within the programmatic document in the footer. Sometimes when you click on it, depending on your browser, your computer, the link might not work, so you just have to copy and paste the link into your browser. But when you click on the link and it works, you get to the site, and it's called Housing and Urban Development ESA Programmatic Reporting. It's basically just a form that you fill out. First 2 questions, name of HUD office or responsible entity. So here is where you would put the name of your tribe. You'd put the contact name of the person at the tribe. And then 3, the contact email of the person at the tribe, contact phone number, the community. So that's kind of the location. Project type, a bunch of project types. So community buildings, energy, fuel tanks, health facilities, sanitation, water storage tanks. Most of the time for your HUD-assisted projects, you're going to be doing community buildings. So those are your tribal offices, community centers, health facilities, and housing, etc. And so if you're doing anything to do with housing, you would choose the first choice, which is community buildings. And then under project description, this you can pull from your environmental review. Or what is it you're trying to do? Are you relocating your village inland to a new location? And that would involve new construction of 20 single family homes or other tribal services. Are you rehabbing existing homes within a village? So just whatever your project description is, put that in. And then 8, project location. Here, they're not talking about geographic location, but more location in relation to existing things. So are you modifying or repairing an existing structure, or doing new construction within the community footprint, or something else that doesn't fit into one of those 2 categories? Most of the time you'll be in the first 2. So if you're doing rehab of a single family home, that means you're doing modification and repair to an existing structure. If you're doing new construction of a home, then you would choose the second choice if it's within the existing community footprint. And then question 9 asks, what species are present? What listed species are present? And there is a possibility that no listed species are present, or there are some other choices as well. So up till now, you haven't actually looked at what species are in the area. It's only question 9 that's like, oh, by the way, do you have any species? And this is where you go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service IPAC tool. You can use this tool to identify species in your area. So IPAC is the Information for Planning and Consultation tool. Usually I'll have a username and password, login, and then I can log all my projects and keep track of all my consultation requests. If you're just trying to do a quick demonstration or just get a quick idea of what's going on, you can just click Get Started instead. Either way, it asks you to find your location, so you can enter the location of your project. Here, I said Homer, Alaska. Maybe I'm doing a homeowner rehab program. And then you define the area where your project will occur. And you can sketch it, you can use polygons to map it out, or you can draw a line. And then once you do that, they'll ask you to confirm that your location is correct. And here on the map, you can see I have Homer plus a lot of the surrounding area. Again, the action area is not limited to your project footprint, but all of the places that could be affected by your project, including where is the construction material or the construction debris being deposited or disposed of. And then once I hit continue, it gives, on the next screen, it'll tell me what species are in that area. And so here you can see there are 2 endangered species, 2 types of eagles, 24 migratory birds, and 1 marine mammal. For Endangered Species Act for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we're concerned with only the endangered species. And here it lists short-tailed albatross and Steller's eider. So back to the reporting form, I click on short-tailed albatross and Steller's eider. And then the last question is, what is your finding, or what is your effects determination? No effect, not likely to affect, or further consultation required. Most of the time when you're submitting this form, you should be doing this because you have a not likely to adversely affect listed species finding. Again, when we answered those questions, maybe you were not in one of those communities in table 1 and you were building in the summer. And maybe you had, but you didn't have any ground disturbance because you were doing rehab. And so when we said may affect, not likely to adversely affect, so that is the second finding. And then you click submit. And after you submit, it will generate an automatic email response to the email listed on the form. So make sure that the email you listed on the form is a valid email address, because that's where we're going to get your documentation. And so their response will say, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has received a response to the HUD Endangered Species Act Programmatic report form. Copy of your responses are listed below. We recommend you save this email as proof of completion for your records. If any changes occur, please email this person and reference this consultation number. And then at the bottom, it'll just give you a recap or summary of all the responses that you filled in that form. So then there's a record of what you wrote and their response. And this is what you print out or save and keep in your environmental review file. So just a recap of the form. So the tribe submits the form online. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service generates an automated response. And once you get that response, the Section 7 requirements are fulfilled. You don't need to undergo any further consultation. That's assuming that you had that not likely to adversely affect endangered species finding. And then you file that response in the environmental review record. Otherwise, you're not done with consultation. You need to have that response back. And then really important, any CEST environmental review cannot convert to exempt, because even just filling out that online form, that does count as consultation. And again, failure to submit the form, even if you follow the programmatic, but you don't actually notify U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service by submitting that form, means that consultation is not finished. What does that look like on the environmental review record? In the 58.5 checklist under endangered species, you might say this project may affect but is unlikely to adversely affect endangered species or critical habitat. A reporting form was submitted to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. See the appendix. Therefore, this project is in compliance. Just a note, don't forget to add the finding for NOAA fisheries. In this example, I didn't add it in, but in a later example, I'll show you what that could look like. And because you submitted that reporting form, you did have to undergo a formal compliance step, which means you cannot convert to exempt, or you cannot have this CEST review convert to exempt. And if you're unable to come to that finding of may affect but unlikely to adversely affect, then you would have to move forward with a biological assessment. And in the guidance or in the programmatic, it lists the following elements that a biological assessment should contain, including a description of your project, site-specific information. So in addition to location of the project and action area, what was found there, vegetation, habitat, ecological characteristics and features, what the effect of the action is going to be, anticipated incidental take, so how many individual, animals or plants or whatever endangered species it is, how many individuals might get killed as a result of your project, any conservation measures you're going to take, and a preliminary effects determination. And then further on in the programmatic, there are some additional recommendations of things to do to avoid impacts to species. If you're within 200 meters of the coastline or another water body, then you should use downshielding lights in your project to reduce visibility and possible attractions of birds in flight. That's just, if birds see light, then they might go towards it, and then you'll have a bird problem on your project. Also, if you have any infrastructure, your transmission lines and guy wires should be fitted with bird deterrent to prevent birds from colliding with power lines. Okay, our last knowledge check for today's webinar. The environmental review for your homeowner occupied rehab program had a may affect, unlikely to adversely affect finding for endangered species. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service acknowledged receipt of your reporting form through that automated email. Can your CEST environmental reviews for these homes still convert to exempt? Yes or no? Okay, we have answers from half of you. Let's wait for a few more people to choose A or B. You have a 50-50 chance of getting this right or wrong, and no one's judging you because I don't know who said what. And this is something that I have mentioned several times on a few slides, so just to make sure that the point hits home. Okay, so half of you said your review cannot convert to exempt, and 2 of you said your review could convert to exempt. The answer is no. Even though you had a may affect, unlikely to adversely affect finding, you still need to go through with the full HUD approval process. Your CEST review cannot convert to exempt. Submitting the reporting form counts as a form of consultation, so your project cannot convert to exempt. Answer is no. I'm going to repeat that 20 more times today. And so in your HUD-ER, let's say if you were doing homeowner occupied rehab or even just rehab of your rental units, which would normally be a categorically excluded review subject to 58.5. Under endangered species, in the 58.5 checklist, this is what you might say for the full text. This project may affect, but is unlikely to adversely affect, endangered species under U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service jurisdiction, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Programmatic. A reporting form was submitted to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This project will have no effect on endangered. So then reporting form was submitted. And then separately, this project will have no effect on endangered species according to the NOAA fisheries guidance. See the appendix. Therefore, this project is in compliance. So in this case, I wrote out both the finding for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Programmatic and the NOAA fisheries guidance. So make sure if you're in Alaska that you comply with both of them, or with that you consider both agencies in your Section 7 process. And then at the end of the environmental review, just before the signature lines where it says determination, the first option would be to convert to exempt. But in this case, you submitted the reporting form to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That counts as consultation. The checkbox under yes and no is checked for yes. And so your project cannot convert to exempt. You would choose or select the second option under determination, which is this categorically excluded project or activity cannot convert to exempt because there are circumstances which require compliance with one or more federal laws and authorities cited at 58.5. You have to complete your mitigation protocol requirements, publish the notice of intent to request release of funds or post, and obtain an authority to use grant funds before committing or drawing down any funds. And so this process can add another 3 to 5 weeks to your project timeline. Now you might be thinking, if your projects are mostly going to be homeowner rehab, and if they're all going to not convert to exempt, then each of these projects are going to require an extra 3 to 5 weeks to go through the HUD approval process. So one thing you could do to streamline that is to use tiering of environmental reviews, where you do a tier 1 environmental review for your whole rehab program, and then you publish or post the public notice and submit the request for release of funds to HUD only once for the whole program. And then after you get the authority to use grant funds from HUD, then you wouldn't need further HUD approval for the individual homes, at which point a site-specific or tier 2 review would be performed for each home or each applicant. There was a webinar on tiering on October 17th, 2023, so that is available online. You can review that. And so that would be the recommended way to get around having to have every single one of your projects that are homeowner rehab in Alaska have to go through the full process. You can use tiering to streamline that. Here are some resources. We'll pull them up later, but the links are here. And once this webinar is online, you'll be able to download this presentation and click on the links directly to lead to each of these. And we'll go over some of these in the case study in a minute. So now let's go to a demonstration of how to analyze all of this. Let's say you're trying to do a rehab program for homes in Akutan, Alaska. And so let's start with the no effect guidance for NOAA fisheries. And let me zoom in on that. So step one, see if there are any species here. Step two, what is the effect? Here's a definition of no effect, or how you might come to a no effect finding. But the real test for that, as we mentioned, is answering the 7 questions that follow. Number 1, are there listed species or critical habitats in the action area? And you can check through the critical habitat mapper or the endangered species mapper through NOAA fisheries. So let's go to that site. And this is what it looks like. And here I've zoomed into Akutan, Alaska. I can change the base map gallery using the button on the right-hand side, and then that'll give me imagery, which will give me a better idea of what I'm looking at. And here you can see that Akutan is a pretty small village, a couple of homes, a couple of buildings, and there is some overlap of this blue area, which indicates species, with the landmass. And so this is where I would probably just reach out to NOAA Fisheries and ask, okay, I'm just doing single family rehab on these homes. Does that actually overlap with the species? You can see here the blue juts onto the mainland a little bit. So I would just ask. Okay, and then when you click on the blue blobs, you can see what species are in this area. So we have stellar sea lion, fin whale, humpback whale, northern Pacific right whale, sperm whale, western Pacific gray whale. And then there's also page 2. So I click the arrow, and they also have some seals, dolphins, more whales, porpoises, killer whales. So a bunch of species. Okay, going back to the guidance. Are there listed species or critical habitat in the action area? Again, the action area is unlikely to include the areas where the blue blobs are, but in this case, because there's some overlap, I would just call NOAA Fisheries for technical assistance for more clarity, and hopefully they get to a no. And the next question, will species be present in the action area while the project activity is taking place? Again, this is where when you call NOAA Fisheries, you can ask about that. Will the proposed action damage or destroy critical habitat? Unlikely to, because you're probably limiting the rehab to just the structure itself. Will you require an extra barge or vessel traffic to deliver supplies, materials, or equipment beyond what is regularly scheduled? For a small rehab project, this is very unlikely. You're probably just going to follow the currently scheduled barges for delivery of supplies. Will any part of the project take place below mean high water? No, because you're not doing anything in the water, you're just working on homes. Do you expect contaminants, trash, or debris from the project action to reach salt water? So this is where it's important to know exactly how the construction debris will be disposed of. And hopefully the answer is going to be no, where you have a place that you're disposing of this material safely. And then, will the project action be within 3,000 feet of where seals or sea lions are, or will be hauled out? And if you're unsure, and this is pretty close to the ocean, but we don't know if seals or sea lions are being hauled out there, this is where you can, again, call NOAA Fisheries and ask for their assistance. And then if you say yes to any of these questions, then you would go through consultation. And here's information on informal consultation, which is when you might affect, but you're unlikely to adversely affect any species, versus consultation where there's a good chance that something will be affected. And so NOAA Fisheries will prepare a biological opinion after you submit a biological evaluation or biological assessment to them. Here are some key definitions. And then for further information, on the HUD side, you contact Brian Sturdivant, or on the NOAA Fisheries side, you've got Greg. And then to request consultation, you can submit a request here. Okay, so that's NOAA Fisheries. Let's go on to the Fish and Wildlife Service Programmatic Agreement, or Programmatic. This letter has a lot of information, and then page 3 is where you start your analysis. Is your project located within a community outside of the range of listed species? So you check for Table 3. Table 3 is going to be on one of the later pages. And so we're looking for Actan, Alaska. It is not listed. So then I go back. So I said no, project is not listed in Table 3. So I go to Table 2. Is a project located north of this latitude on the northern slope? And no, the project is not in any of these communities and is much further south. And so I go to question 3. Will the project take place outside of the May through September timing window? If you said yes, if you think you're able to do all this rehab work between October and April, then you could say yes, and that would lead to a May effect, but not likely to adversely affect finding. If you say no, because the winter is cold and you want to do most of your work during the summer, then you would go to question 4. Does the project occur within the existing village footprint? Now, if you're just doing rehab, then of course you are just going to have your project occur within the existing footprint. So then you would say yes. So your project may affect, but is not likely to adversely affect. And so then you don't need to go on to the further questions. But if for some reason, so if you're doing new construction, then you would have to go to the next one. And if you're doing groundbreaking activities, then you would have to do consultation. If you're not, then you would still arrive at that may affect, but unlikely to adversely affect finding. Okay, so that's the analysis. Most of your projects, especially your rehabs, are going to be may affect, unlikely to adversely affect. There are also some additional conservation recommendations that we talked about. Required reporting will show you the form. There is a link to the form down here. On some browsers, the link doesn't work. You have to make sure you get the full link copied and pasted. So I have got the link in the presentation, but you can also just copy or type the entire link, and some browsers only give you the first line, so that's why it might not work. Some more information here. And then table 1 is just for reference. It just talks about projects that have limit effects, and it's just for context. It's not really a screening tool, it just gives you more information and background. And then table 2, same thing, it just talks about the endangered species and their critical habitats in Alaska. It's just for your information. You're not using this for screening. It's really table 3, that's the important one, where it lists the communities where you don't need to do any further analysis because there will be no effect on endangered species if you're one of these communities. And then table 4 is the contact information for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service offices, depending on where in the state you are. All right, so let's go to the IPAC tool. and I recommend that you have a government login to access your projects and save all your work. But in the meantime, we can just use the Get Started button. And we can go to Akutan, Alaska. Let's say I want to do a polygon, and let's say I want to see my project better. So I change it to satellite imagery. Okay, so let's see. All right, let's say the boundaries of projects or homes I'm looking at are over here. So I'm just going to draw out the polygon. And let's say I'm only considering these locations. About 13 acres of land total. Maybe I expand it a little bit to include these buildings. Continue. And then I've got 2 endangered species, the northern sea otter and Steller's eider, and then critical habitat for northern sea otter. And then I can continue to do more and define the project. But because we already have the programmatic, we know that this will be a no or may affect, unlikely to adversely affect finding. The next step then, let's go back. Let's go back to the programmatic, and yeah, so we confirmed that. Okay, so it's may affect, unlikely to adversely affect, and we now know what species we're talking about. So then we go to the reporting form, and here you would say the name of the tribe. If you are a housing authority that works with multiple tribes, then you can list multiple tribal names, or fill out this form once, or fill out this form for every tribe that you're working with. Contact name of a person at the tribe and their email, phone number, community. So here, Akutan. Project type, this is going to be housing, so it'll be community buildings. Project description, talk about your homeowner, occupied rehab program that could include rehabilitation activities such as new roof, new window, interior rehab, and list everything and so on. Project location, not the address, but where in relation to existing structures. And so here we're saying it's going to be modification or repair to an existing structure because we're doing rehab. And then the listed species that we saw through the IPAC tool, over here again, is going to be the northern sea otter and Steller's eider. And the effect, according to the programmatic, is not likely to adversely affect listed species, and then you submit. Once you submit this form, the website will generate an automated response from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that will be an email that goes to the email that you listed under contact email. So please make sure that you type in the correct email address on this, and once you receive that email or someone at the tribe receives that email, make sure that you keep that email in your environmental review files. Otherwise, they will say that you didn't go through this process. So make sure you keep a record of this. Okay, so that's the process for analyzing endangered species this way. Further environmental guidance, again, there's the HUD Region 10 Environmental Review website. Zoomed in a little bit here so you could see better. And so you would go to under Endangered Species Act, And that's where you find information for Alaska and the links to these two documents. Here's the HUD-COTOC website. And if you go under maybe either environmental or environmental resources, you'll get to this page where under webinars, you can get the full list of webinars that we've been recording over the last 2 years. And that might look like this. So you can see all of the previous materials and recordings. And then one more that I'll do is the HUD Exchange Environmental Review page. View resources under related federal laws and authorities, endangered species, and then this will give you just the usual process for endangered species, not including the specific tools for Alaska. And then finally, I want to end with resources. If you have any questions, you can always contact HUD. We have Brian Sturdivant on the line today. He'll be answering some questions. And then the other field environmental officers in Region 10, which does cover Alaska. Okay, at this point, I want to stop and see if anyone had any questions. And let me break the ice and pose a couple of questions to Brian. One is, okay, if I'm a tribe in Alaska, do I have to use these documents? Do I have to follow the programmatic or the no effect guidance from either of these agencies?
Good question, Catherine. And no, the word have to is the critical. They are not absolutely required. They're streamlining guidance to assist tribes and REs, because let's face it, very few of us are biologists, and very few of us have the wherewithal and the knowledge to really sit down and answer these questions without some kind of checklist or guidance. So that's what this is. These two documents, and remember, as Catherine pointed out, Endangered Species Act, you must consider both services, even if you're far interior. If you're for Yukon, Galena, it doesn't really matter. Even though you might not be on the coast, you still must consider the impacts that your project may have on marine species that fall under NOAA fisheries. We call them National Marine Fisheries Services, NMFS. They have multiple names, don't ask me why. But anyway, no, you do not have to use it, but they are exceptionally good, and you would have a much more difficult time and be more liable for your determination if you made the wrong determination, if it was not in use of this guidance that HUD went to great lengths to sit down and negotiate with NMFS, National Marine Fisheries Services, as well as entered into that biological programmatic agreement. To HUD staff that might be on here, Part 50, a lot of you are REs that are on his call, or HUD staff that might view this webinar later. You must use this information. It is not an option for you. For Part 58, entitlement grantees or REs, responsible entities, yes, it's an option for you.
Okay, and then another question. If I have a no effect finding, do I need to consult with those agencies?
If you can make so let's be clear that there's two processes here. You saw on the form that Catherine went through that you submit under the programmatic agreement with Fish and Wildlife, a no effect, not likely to adversely affect, or other. Well, you used the programmatic to come to a no effect because your village is not listed in Table 3 of that document. So that's a form of you're just saying no effect, and you're fine because you used the information provided and that your project met the guidelines that you reasonably could make and document a no effect. So no, you do not have to go to and ask for concurrence from NMFS or from Fish and Wildlife, because they've already done that work. You probably think about it this way. You're asking them to do it twice. They're going to say to you, well, if you made a no effect, we don't make concurrences on no effects. So save yourself from that. If you can document and properly show that you made a no effect, you're good. Your environmental review as far as endangered species is done, is documented. You need to do nothing further. It is only if you cannot make a no effect that you must reach out for concurrence and or submit the proper documentation under if you're using the programmatic.
Oh, thank you very much for that explanation, Brian. Let's see if there are any other audience questions. If not, any closing words, Brian, or things that you want the folks who will be watching this webinar, anything you want them to go home with?
Please always consult the Region 10 website. These documents are subject to annual updates with HUD. Consults and goes back to both Fish and Wildlife and NOAA Fisheries to ask if they want updates to these. It's impossible to really contact everybody who might need to know this information. Please always go and pull down the latest from the Region 10 website. Never just save and keep this in a file. Both of these great documents. Please pull down and download a fresh copy every single time. And this is the reason why, is because it is our only way to be able to communicate updates and changes in guidance that happens within this region. And remember that the national website, the HUD Exchange, where you typically go to get updates on guidance on how to do environmental reviews, they don't understand or they don't know that there's a specialized streamlined guidance for the Pacific Northwest, specifically Alaska. So always go to the Region 10 website, use it as a supplemental website to the national website, and always pull down fresh documents to ensure that there's been no updates. That is the way we communicate updates.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. And I think with that, if there are no further questions, I think we can end today's webinar. And thank you, everyone, for joining in today.